Welcome back, everybody. Today we examine one of the fastest superstars in American Speedway history, and that's none other than Mike Bast. Mike got his start in 1968 at the Whiteman Stadium with his brother Steve. His father bought him and his brother. They shared a JAP and they raced it the first year. Nobody expected too much from Mike, but he surprised people. No one could have really predicted how great Mike was going to be, probably not even himself, but he turned out to be one of the greatest riders in the United States history. Mike's favorite rider was Dick Bugsley Mann. He was a great flat tracker, but Mike didn't realize that he was going to even be greater than the great Dick Bugsley Mann. As great of a rider as Mike was, he had an equally downside to him too. And he became one of the most famous legendary speedway riders of all time, with a downside also. Mike and his brother Steve just did not know how to relate with the fans, and I don't know why they were like that, because it's the fans who pay the purse, who support the riders, and bring home the money in the bank. Even the legendary speedway rider Slidin' Sonny Nutter, he said that he actually greeted the fans each and every week at Costa Mesa and other tracks. He would sign the autographs, and he would tell the people, come back next week because I need more money. Mike Bast did not interact with the fans, and that actually led for his lack of popularity with the fans. And it's the fans who actually give us the money as riders and put money in our pockets. No one could question the dominance that Michael Bast had on the speedway scene in the United States in the 70s. I mean, he won 7 out of 10 United States Speedway Championships. That's 70%. That will never be repeated again. Mike was a true professional, and he actually left it all on the track. I mean, he won over 4,000 races in his career, and he was just sensational. Mike Bast was one of the greatest riders of all time in United States Speedway history. As good of a rider that Michael Bast was, he had an equally downside, and that was his lack of communication and his lack of connecting with the fans. You see, Speedway is not a sport about the motorcycles as in motocross. We don't relate to like a Yamaha or Suzuki. We relate to the rider. The late, great Mr. Penhall, Bruce Penhall's dad, rest in peace, he told a young Bruce at one time, you must give the fans lots of attention because without the fans, there will be no Speedway. In Bruce Penhall's autobiography, he actually says that he was at the races once. I think he was having like a beer in the pits, which is really no big deal. And his papa came up to him and said, put the beer down, there's little kids watching you. And he told Bruce, a young Bruce, to be a good example for the fans. Mike Bast was an example of what a speedway rider should be like, a constant example of professionalism. In the 1970s, the cool thing was to grow your hair long, to party, and to just be cool. But Mike Bast had nothing to do with that. Michael Bast didn't put any chemicals on his body or anything. He just went to the gym, worked out, he had a chiseled body. He just focused on one thing, and that was winning speedway racers. He was a machine, the machine of all time. He was a fine-tuned athlete. He was sensational, and he won so much that he actually became booed by the fans. He became a villain. Even though lots of the fans thought he was a villain, Michael Bast was no villain. He was actually one of the greatest spear riders in American history, of all time in American history. Mike and his brother Steve were considered villains because they were not really sociable with the fans. And the fans, they actually took that wrong. And a lot of the fans did not like the Bast brothers because even some of the fans, they called Michael Bast the wind machine because he was cold and he was calculating. The great Speedway rider and promoter of Costa Mesa Fairgrounds, Brad Oxley, he said that actually if you opened Mike Bast up, you'd have a bunch of wires and stuff because he was like a computer. Now, being a computer isn't all bad because he won 7 out of 10 United States Speedway Championships, so I think that worked to his advantage. Brad Oxley went on to say that this is a sport of flashy mavericks, and Michael Bast was just a computerized type of guy. But there was this mystique about Michael Bast. I mean, he was like computerized. He was not even human. And people just didn't understand him. And that's why they talk about him even to this day. He was not even human. Mike Bast just wasn't flashy. He wasn't like Danny Becker and Rick Woods. He wasn't the handsome glamour boys. He was just a speedway rider. Racing to the Bast brothers was just about racing. It was about winning, and it was about taking home a lot of money. Mike Bast was perceived to be a villain, and he just didn't like that. You know, who likes that? I mean, when I raced, I didn't like people booing me either. And he used to go home to his wife Dee, and he actually would cry, and he would feel bad. He'd say, you know, why doesn't people like me? I'm the best rider out there. I'm the best dressed. I'm clean. I'm not a party animal. And people just don't like me. The fans just hated Mike Bast. I mean, they booed him. They spit on him. They threw beer on him. They just didn't like him. Even people paid to watch Michael Bast lose. This really did affect Michael mentally, and he just said that it really bothered him, and of course it bothered everyone. But Mike Bast later said that he should have been laughing all the way to the bank. Mike took everything serious. That's why they called him the machine. It was good, and he actually studied the racetracks. He studied the riders, what their good points were, bad points. He actually was a student of Speedway, and that actually led him to win over 4,000 races. No one ever in the United States Speedway history was as smooth, as consistent, as steady as Michael Bast was on a Speedway bike. And Speedway is actually a sport that's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. But with Michael Bast, you know what's going to happen. He is as steady as a Rolex watch.